What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. It is Friday and it is game week. I'm your host, Max Torres. That's Graham Metzker, and we are here to give you our final thoughts ahead of the season opening game between the number 11 Oregon Ducks and the number 3 Georgia Bulldogs. Chick-fil-A kickoff game. Dan Lanning's return against his former team, his debut as a head coach. Georgia's start at a national title defense, a run at repeating as national champions. There's a whole bunch of storylines. We had a podcast earlier in the week with Dogs Daily publisher Brooks Austin. Go give that a listen if you haven't already. That's on my YouTube channel at Oregon Football Max Torres. And you can find the podcast, Ducks Dish Podcast, on your platform app of choice. But yeah, before we get into the show, man, Graham, how we doing, man? Been a minute since you've been on. Excited to get into the show.
Max, I'm super excited to get into it. Thank you so much for having me back. It's one day away. I feel like we've been looking towards this game for the whole year, ever since Oregon football wrapped up in January. We've been so ready for this matchup. So it almost doesn't feel real that it's about to happen, but I think I speak for both of us when I say we're so ready.
Oh yeah, we're big time ready for this game. It's going to be a really fun weekend of football. We had Penn State and Purdue last night, as well as Pitt and West Virginia, two just bangers of like awesome games on Thursday night, something we're not really used to, but definitely something that we'll take, seeing that we want all the college football that we can get. Just a quick side note, I do have my fan going, so I'm going to try to mute myself when I'm not talking, just to keep the audio as nice as possible. We got, as a lot of folks know, we got a little West Coast heat wave, so we're just doing our best to bear through it. But yeah, it's going to be a fun episode of the podcast. So we're going to give some of our final thoughts on this game. We're going to talk about what Dan Lanning has said kind of throughout the week, what players have said throughout the week a little bit too. Give our score predictions, which we already gave on ducksdigest.com. That's where you guys can always find those earliest. And then we're also going to take some mailbag questions. I put out a tweet at mtorres sports is where you can follow me. And I got some people that sent in some questions. But I also want to encourage you guys, if you're watching live here on the YouTube channel, hop in that comment section in the live chat and throw a question our way. Looks like we already got some people here. Gerard is a longtime listener saying, let's get this program started. My guy out there in the 408, San Jose, love to hear it. Mikey G's here as well saying, let's go Ducks. Let's go Duckies, go Ducks. We're seeing a lot of posts about Oregon fans, flocking to Atlanta, trying to take it over, or at least, do their best to make sure that the fan base is well represented. I definitely wish I was out there in Atlanta for that game. But definitely had to choose to stay home, but super stoked to cover it and watch it this weekend.
Yeah, I have been hearing, Max, you were telling us a little bit about the heat wave that we're having over here. I'm hearing that it is hot and it is raining in Atlanta right now, really humid, thunderstorms. So, pick your poison, East Coast, West Coast. And I don't know if either of them is the most hospitable place right now.
Yeah, it's a little rough. I mean, you're going to kind of get your extreme weather or, your weird weather patterns wherever you go in the country. You just got to kind of do your best to deal with it. That's all you can do. But the show goes on, whether it be the Chick-fil-A kickoff game or the Ducks Dish podcast. So we're excited. I think it'd be fun to start with some mailbag questions, Graham. And then after that, maybe we can get into our predictions a little bit and see what people have to say in the comments. So let's go ahead and do that. Got 4 interesting questions here, so we'll each give our take and just try to have some good conversation here. Xander Brown asks, who's the guy the SEC media is raving about on the Ducks after the game, win or lose? And who's the guy Duck fans are raving about after the game, also win or lose? I think it'd be fun to do maybe one guy on each side of the ball. But I think for me, the guy that SEC media is going to be raving about for Oregon after this game is probably going to be Brandon Dorlus, because he has really been the biggest force on Oregon's defensive line, the biggest consistent force on Oregon's defensive line since he got to Eugene. Obviously, you got to give credit to Kayvon Thibodeau last year and Popo and Mavai. Those guys in the interior don't often get the praise that they deserve. But Graham, this is one of the deepest defensive lines that I think Oregon's had. I was thinking that one of the deepest and one of the biggest defensive lines that Oregon has had from a roster standpoint since that 2014 national championship run, when they had DeForest Buckner and Eric Armstead lining up on the same defensive line. So I'm going to go with Brandon Dorlus on defense because that's such a big deal for Oregon to be able to match Georgia's physicality, stop the run. I mean, we all saw how far stopping the run took Oregon last year against Ohio State, and I think that's got to be a big piece of where the defensive game plan starts this weekend.
Max, I really like that point that you started with, because going into the Ohio State game last year, we knew that Kayvon Thibodeau was going to be out. It's not on the defensive line, but we also knew Justin Flo was going to be out. And I really did not have a lot of confidence in Oregon's defensive line going into that game. But now you have the same guys that proved themselves in the horseshoe last year. You got Braden Swinson, you got Dorlus, like you were talking about, and Popo. And I completely agree with you that this is one of the deepest defensive lines that Oregon has had in a really long time. And it's one that I have confidence in to at least show up in this game and make it a competition. I would say my personal choice for the guy that the SEC media is going to be raving about, I got to say Justin Flo. I just think that anybody that hasn't had a fair chance to see this guy play football in an actual game, which is unfortunately a lot of us, yeah, I mean, it's groundbreaking. Even just the minimal time that he played against Fresno State last year before he got injured in that very first game opener, I mean, he was electric. He's impossible to miss when you're looking at the play. So I think a good game, a full game for Justin Flo will definitely turn some heads that weren't already looking.
Yeah, Justin Flo is a great person to go to for this question because I think a part that makes it interesting is Kirby Smart earlier in the week talked about Oregon's linebackers, and he mentioned Justin Flo, Noah Sewell. I actually don't know if he mentioned them by name, but everybody, like, you know how coaches are. Sometimes they'll just do numbers or they'll keep it kind of vague. But suffice it to say, just paraphrasing, he was basically saying, those are two guys that we are very familiar with because we recruited them when they were coming out of high school. And these are guys that you would, let's just say in the past, 3 to 4 years, maybe before Mario Cristobal really turned the gear, flipped the switch for recruiting at Oregon. These are guys that you would expect to be playing in the SEC in recent years. So I think the fact that Oregon has both of these guys on their team is obviously awesome. This is Flo's return from injury. That's yet another storyline. I remember I was writing some story earlier this week for Ducks Digest, and I was kind of saying, that the storylines almost write themselves because there's just so much that's happened during this offseason. There's so many unique angles for this Oregon-Georgia game. Their first time playing since 1977, I believe it was. And then all the connections with the coaching staff. Obviously, Brian McClendon is back on staff there at Georgia after leaving Oregon, going to Miami for maybe a little bit of Cuban coffee with Mario Cristobal. And then he said, okay, no, I'll actually, on second thought, I'll go to Athens and join the defending national champions. That sounds like fun to me. But yeah, so I think that was the point that I just wanted to bring up, that Kirby Smart says that those are two guys that they're very familiar with. And it's hard to draw up a better game for Flo's return. And I think to just really give us a good feel for how great this duo can really be between Noah Sewell and Justin Flo, because believe it or not, this might be the last season we see Justin Flo playing at Oregon if he does end up having a good enough season to test NFL waters, which it kind of feels like that's the indication, or that's the feeling right now around Oregon and just, national pundits.
Yeah, and I think honestly, Oregon fans would not have too much of a problem with that. Yes, maybe you miss out on some time with Justin Flo, that's gotta hurt. But if he were to have such a good season that he could take it right to the NFL, I don't think there will be many Ducks fans complaining about his performance.
Yeah, so as weird as it sounds, maybe this is Justin Flo's last season at Oregon. I don't think that's what fans necessarily want, like you mentioned, but it would be a very strong endorsement for the program, right? For Oregon to keep recruiting, landing, developing, and then ultimately sending these guys to the NFL quickly 3 years, not 4 years. That's not to say you want to get rid of these guys, but you want to get them in playing as true freshmen. The more guys that you can do that with on a consistent basis, then that is kind of the area that you want to find yourself in. So now let's go ahead and answer this question for offense, because I think it's asking SEC media is raving about, and then who are Duck fans raving about. But I kind of feel like they go hand in hand to a degree, even though we know the SEC media doesn't always have the most respect for Pac-12, but they kind of dug themselves into a hole there, just being an embarrassment of a conference. But offensively, Graham, I want to go Dante Thornton because we know that Oregon's going to try to run the ball a lot, and I'm really excited about their running backs, the group of talented guys they have there. Sean Dollars coming back from injury, Byron Carbo looking to follow up a pretty strong freshman campaign where he really didn't see a whole bunch of playing time, but like the most playing time we've seen from a freshman back at Oregon in quite some time. And then you got Bucky Irving and Noah Whittington coming in as well. But I think that for Oregon to win this game, that they're going to need to be willing to pass the ball. And I think that Dante Thornton, this is like a perfect time for him to really show how much he's grown, how comfortable he is in Kenny Dillingham's offense, how he's a matchup problem and can hang with these SEC defensive backs. I mean, Keely Ringo against Dante Thornton would be a sweet matchup to have on Saturday, especially when you consider kind of a little bit of a flip in the storylines, because Dante Thornton is from Baltimore. Keely Ringo is from Tacoma, I want to say. I know he was originally from Washington, and then he transferred to Saguaro out in Arizona to play his college ball. But, like, you know, they're from different coasts, and they kind of were playing from, like, you know, Keely Ringo, maybe you thought he was going to play for Oregon, or what if, you know, Dante was playing for an SEC team. So I'm going to say that Dante Thornton is going to be the guy that SEC media and Duck fans are raving about when this one's all said and done.
You know, Max, it's tough to say, and I think I might have gone the opposite direction with you when answering this question, because I do think that Oregon, if they are going to win this game, it's going to be some Bo Nix throwing the deep ball, Dante Thornton, Chris Hudson, those guys catching the big play ball. But I think in order for Oregon to get to that point in the game, they've got to at least try to establish the run game. And I think if they really do want to win this game, they have to find some success there. It's not an easy task for sure. This is a Georgia defense that may be one of the best at stopping the run in the nation. Even with losing all their starters, you know, they've still got guys like Jalen Carter in the trenches to make it difficult. But I think that Oregon fans will be loving one of the three running backs in Byron Cardwell, Marquise Irving, and Noah Whittington. I think that those three, and then also Sean Dollars as well, is a really, really mean running back room. And if not by the Georgia game, by the end of the season, I could see it being just as successful as Travis Dye was having success at the end of last season, as CJ Verdell showed at the beginning of last season. I wouldn't be surprised. You know, the offensive line, that's the real unsung hero. You know, they won't grab the headlines from fans like that, but all five starters return to the offensive line for Oregon. I think it'll make Byron Cardwell's job really easy. I'm expecting him to be the guy that really does it for Oregon if they're going to get this win.
Yeah, and you make a good point. They're going to have to establish the run, I think, to really open up the entire offense. And that starts in the trenches with the offensive line. I guess I didn't want to go Bo Nix because I thought that was a pretty straightforward answer. But no fault for you there. I'm not faulting you there for going with Bo because he's going to have a good game if Oregon wants to be competitive in this one. So I don't want to get too much into that, though, because that could be a little bit of a question that we have coming up. But really good question from Xander. I liked answering that one, but let's keep moving on here. Next question comes from Christopher Stipe, and Christopher asks, why does the masses think this staff will not succeed? All the coaches have at all levels up to this point. Good luck trying to stop them. # Oregon Strong. Go Ducks. Yeah, I think a lot of people within the Oregon fan base would agree with this, just that it feels like Oregon's coaching staff has been questioned quite a bit since they got hired. And I think part of that has to do with maybe not some hesitation that I had, but I think one very important point that was running through my head when this coaching search was going on after Lanning got hired was, when we were waiting to see how the rest of the staff filled out, is because he's so young, he doesn't have a super extensive coaching tree. But at the same time, we saw that it doesn't matter how long you're necessarily coaching, but rather where you've been. And he's been at Alabama, where he coached with Tosh, and then he's been at Memphis, where he coached with Kenny Dillingham, or maybe that was Arizona State. I could be mixing things up a little bit, but I bring that point up to just say that I feel like I'm really encouraged by the way that he built out his staff. I don't think there's necessarily one weakness or one position group where I'm a little bit more skeptical or questioning. But I think that this is just a big prove it game for this Oregon staff, because you can't ask for much bigger of a game to get your legs under you and get started as a coaching staff.
Yeah, Max, I think that at least when Mario Cristobal first left, I was kind of hoping that there were some coaches that would stick around at Oregon. Um, I I think myself, along with a lot of Duck fans, really kind of fell in love with the last coaching staff, even just outside of Cristobal. I think of Alex Mirabal, immediately comes to my mind. He was the offensive line coach. He really epitomized that trenches mentality that Cristobal had. He was a great guy on the team to root for on the coaching staff. So it takes time to get over that, I think, and to get to meet the new coaches. But I have been impressed by really every single one of the hires that Dan Lanning made, especially Tosh Lapoy coming from the NFL and Adrian Clem both of them coming from NFL gigs right before this. I don't see, I think it's hard to see why people are writing off these coaches, in my mind, at least at this point, even without them coaching a game for Oregon yet.
Yeah, and that's the biggest point that I think I want to get to, or I'm trying to hammer home, is that they haven't coached in a game yet. And I feel like Oregon, as much as they can, has done everything right that you can without having the season going on. I think you've missed on the recruiting trail on some big offensive line targets, which is definitely a little bit of a bummer. And then Jacoby Lane recently committed to USC when Oregon looked like they were in the driver's seat there after extending an offer. Jacoby Lane, of course, being the 2023 wideout out of Arizona, 6'4" speedster, really talented wide receiver that I'm really intrigued by. He was one of the top performers at the Elite 11 from a skill position standpoint, but I think really at the end of the day, you kind of have to just pump the brakes and really wait until the staff has a game under their belts to ultimately assess them off of. Even after that, wait until they get into conference play and see where things are at. I think that one of the biggest things you have to look for with this staff is, can they make adjustments? Because that's not something that we saw any of in those games against Utah, and that was totally unacceptable. So I think I understand a little bit of the skepticism, or maybe intrigue is a better way to put it, because that's where I would go with it. But you got to wait and see what happens when they ultimately have a game under their belt.
Yeah, it's really easy to get caught up in the hype, I think. Um, with the recruits, obviously there's some misses. They found some hits as well already since they've joined. I would say they haven't let their foot off the gas. I think Oregon, in the recruiting rankings, I'd say they're pretty similarly ranked for this 2022 class as they were for some of the seasons before, if not a little bit lower. But that you got to remember, that's a recruiting season that they weren't there for the whole time. A really big part of recruiting, even though I feel like the most recruits you see committing is kind of in the spring, summer type of area. A lot of, one of the best recruiting tools for football teams, and certainly Oregon has used it, is inviting players to come to the games. So I think that once Oregon's back in Austin Stadium with these coaches, we got a little bit better feel for what the team is going to look like. That will maybe convince some critics. And Max, a really big point there on the adjustments, because it did really feel like Mario Cristobal's Oregon teams were, I don't want to say a one-trick pony, but like they would have their plan that they would execute, and if it wasn't working, then that might just be the end of the game. definitely you think of trying to pass the ball more in his time on the offensive side. But we'll have to see. And I think Lanning will be tested right away with adjustments um, facing that Georgia defense. I don't want to get too far ahead into some of the other topics we'll talk about, but yeah, definitely adjustments are crucial if this coaching staff wants to stay around for a while.
Yeah, and just to wrap up, Graham, on the recruiting side of this question and kind of the discussion that we've been having, Oregon's class right now, I believe, by 247 is ranked number 14 in the country with 16 total commits. So they've kind of followed the pattern that we've seen recent coaching staffs. Obviously, Mario Cristobal being the most recent coach before this is doing a lot of that heavy lifting in the spring and summer, building out a bulk of your class. I feel like you got to feel really good about the secondary. That's looking pretty full. A couple guys to keep an eye on there: Dalen Austin, Roger Pleasant, two really talented defensive backs in the 2023 class from the Southern California area. Dalen Austin already committed to LSU, and then Roger Pleasant has a top 6 that also includes Oregon and a handful of other Pac-12 teams. So I think that those are the two guys that you want to keep an eye on to see if Oregon will potentially want to add some more in the 2023 recruiting class. But they also really beefed up the defensive line, getting Michael Gardner, Terrence Green, Tavita Pomee. So I feel like the glaring weakness, if you want to call it that, or just position of need, and you got a 5-star quarterback, the top quarterback commit in program history. So I think that that definitely bodes well for the future of the recruiting class, and I think that it's better than some people might be thinking, but I think Oregon fans can be spoiled by recruiting sometimes just because they've had so much success in recent years, and I'm totally fine with that because I love covering recruiting. But let me move on to the next question, Graham. Don't want to spend too much time on any one question. So let's see. Let me pull the other question up from our guy, Gerard. Gerard asks, if Oregon defeats Georgia, what will be the 2 to 3 things Oregon did to win the game? If Oregon loses to Georgia, what will be the 2 to 3 things that prevented us from winning? Hashtag Ducks Dish, hashtag Go Ducks. We love seeing the hashtag being used there, so thank you, Gerard, for that. Yeah, Graham, do you want to start with this one? Give your answer first.
Yeah, I'll give one thing to start that I think Oregon did do to win the game. And I think that will, like I alluded to a little bit earlier, that will be adjusting on defense, but specifically to the tight end play. A lot has been made um, recently over Georgia's tight end room. Some have said, it's one of the best ever. I don't know if I want to go that far, but there's definitely some really serious talent in Georgia's tight end room. And when Lanning talked about those tight ends, he talked about they're not just tight ends. You can play them in the wideout position, and then you've got a totally broken matchup on who covers him. So what's the answer? Do you go bigger? Do you have a linebacker cover those quick tight ends and risk maybe getting beaten just to have some more toughness in there? Account for their blocking, or do you go a little bit smaller? Maybe put a safety, a defensive back on the tight ends to make up for the quickness in those route running, but then you're losing out on that physicality that the tight ends bring. So I think if Oregon defeats Georgia, they will have either found one player that was just playing very well on the tight ends, Brock Bowers, Eric Gilbert, um, or they just are making adjustments all the time, switching up their looks and keeping the tight ends contained.
And I think a reason that we should expect to see some adjustments is because Dan Lanning has been very, I don't want to say critical of himself, but just really, it sounds like a cliche now because we've heard it so many times, but embracing the growth mindset himself too. Like, being a first time coach, he's been very self-critical of just evaluating his own performance as a coach. And I think that that'll really bode well for them just as far as, okay, if something's not going right and you don't expect him to be stubborn. I think in his first game, I think, all cards have to be on the table. So adjustments are great. Containing the tight ends, that sounds like another one. I think for me, I'm going to go with running the ball. If Oregon can't run the ball against Georgia, I feel like that really could spell a pretty long day for them offensively because we know that a lot of offenses, you have to be able to pound the rock to open up the play action or to set up some other some other situations throughout the game. So I feel like running the ball has to be big. And it's something that they should be able to do, not only because of their experienced offensive line, but those great running backs that we talked about. So I'm going to say running the ball is super important just to establish that, we're not going to shy away from, this really loaded defensive front that features Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, just to name a few, just two absolute studs to name a few on that defense. So I'm going to say that run the ball has to be one thing that Oregon definitely has to do to win the game.
I totally agree with you. I was thinking about saying the run the ball. I didn't want to just hit home on the point I was talking about with the running backs earlier, but I totally agree. I think Oregon is not in this game at all. If they can't get that run game going, you gotta, especially against a good defense like Georgia, you gotta prove that, the defense should get a little tighter, should send a little bit more pressure, expecting a run to open up those passing lanes for Bo Nix and the Oregon wide receivers.
Another thing that I think is going to be really crucial for Oregon to do in this game, Graham, you got to limit turnovers. You got to limit turnovers and you got to force turnovers. I think that, Ohio State is a great example of that just because it felt like the margin for error was so small, but the Ducks were able to take care of the ball there, and then they got that interception at the end. Verone McKinley picking off C.J. Stroud. That was obviously huge. But yeah, so I think that doing that is going to be really big because you already face a pretty big uphill battle against what many think is going to be the best defense in the nation. So you can't give them anything, and then you got to take it from them as the defense and make them pay for it. I mean, turnovers are great no matter what. But that's the next step. You don't want to just get a turnover and then be like, oh, okay, now we went 3 and out. And then it's like, well, what was all that for? Like the defense is like, okay, now we're going back out because the offense couldn't do anything. So I think those are some of the biggest keys for me that I like to consider for this one. Run the ball, win the turnover battle, take care of the ball. And then, like you said, you got to make some adjustments for what you're seeing out there. Let's see. And then how about the other part of this question? If Oregon loses to Georgia, what will be the 2 to 3 things that prevented them from winning?
I think it kind of goes along with what you were saying, Max, but I think staying too single-minded in their offense, either staying too much to the pass or too much to the run and not mixing up those looks enough. I think that, maybe it is just a little bit of still feelings I have from the Mario Cristobal era, but I want the Ducks to be able to air out the ball. The Ducks have got a quarterback that has proven both that he can air out the ball, can throw the deep pass with great success, and he's shown Bo Nix that he has turnover issues, that he will throw the interception here and there. So I think that not putting too much pressure on Bo Nix, if he has too much pressure, if the game is on his back for the whole time, I don't see Oregon winning. I would like, this isn't, I guess, something that would prevent Oregon from winning, but I would really like Oregon to involve their tight ends in the passing game a little bit more. It's something that was really dearly missed, I think, in last year's Oregon offense. And it kind of goes along with if Bo Nix is just trying to feed his receivers. I think that's something that the Georgia defense will pick up on really quickly.
Okay, yeah. So don't stay one dimensional on offense. I think that's kind of one of the biggest points you're getting at. You got to keep giving them varied looks, keep them honest, and I think that's something I expect to see from Dillingham because it seems like he wants to do a more balanced approach. Whereas we all know how run heavy Mario Cristobal's offense. Well, Joe Moorhead's, you can call it Mario Cristobal's offense, whatever you want. We all know how one dimensional that got. So I'm going to say that. And then I think another thing that could prevent them from winning is just, mental errors or fundamental errors, missed tackles, just those small things that you shouldn't have to think twice about or second guess. And that is part of what Lanning was saying in his press conferences this week, just about how you got to do the little things and you got to be able to out hustle them, out hit them, and just do those little things right so that you don't make bad things worse. Like we've talked about that with Bo Nix at quarterback. I think the same thing goes for the defense. You don't want to be arm tackling. And I think that another thing that could prevent them from winning not to harp on them or criticize them, but like I'm just really interested to see how this secondary looks against Georgia, because that's been my biggest question mark on this team the entire offseason. We only have the spring game to go off of. We know Georgia's tight ends are loaded, their running backs are good, they're like anywhere you look, there's going to be some serious talent, and there's going to be some young guys that I think are going to be asked to contribute in this game. So with all the versatility and cross training that we've heard about, it seems like we're going to see those guys rotating quite a bit in the secondary on Saturday.
Yeah, and the stuff that Coach Lanning, Coach Demetrius Martin talk about cross training players, it's for this game. I don't think there's any game where you need guys in positions to be flexible, be hybrids any more than this game where there's so much talent at every position. You need safeties to be able to cover tight ends, wide receivers, just coverage. Um, you're asking a lot from your players, and that's why the Ducks have been working so hard at cross training. But I do think that the Ducks have some very talented players, some very versatile players that can help them out in this category.
Yeah, last point I want to hit on here to answer this question, then we're going to get to a quick break. You just don't beat yourselves. Like, the margin for error is already so small. You don't want to be shooting yourself in the foot, and then maybe that's the difference between a win and a loss, right? So I think you just got to play a clean game. Take what the defense gives you, and don't try to overcomplicate things. That's the biggest balance that Lanning's talked about, trying to strike. With the new offense, new defense, it goes both ways. You don't want to have these guys overthinking things. You want them to just be able to go out there and play, do their thing, be confident, be comfortable, and that's something that I think they're doing everything they can to set themselves up for success. I think we got one more question in the mailbag, which we will get to on the other side of the break. Don't go anywhere. If you're listening on podcast, we have more Oregon football mailbag and more Georgia Oregon preview after this. All right, we are back on the Ducks Dish podcast. We are doing our final thoughts ahead of Oregon versus Georgia in the Chick-fil-A kickoff game. We got our last mailbag question to get to, and then after that, we're going to get to our predictions, our score predictions for the game. Graham and I and some of the other writers at Ducks Digest got together. But this is our last question, which comes from Go Ducks Team Mitch. Who are some potential X factors in this game for Oregon? Who are some guys that could make plays to swing momentum? I think for X factors, let's go on offense a little bit. I already talked about Dante Thornton, so I don't want to choose him again. But I'm gonna go with Seven McGee. I think that I'm not necessarily saying he's the best receiver on the team, but he's the guy that has that really big play ability, whether it's something short and intermediate or maybe something down the field. Oregon's defensive backs were getting pretty toasted in that spring game as far as just getting beat or maybe having some kind of lapse in coverage. And that's why Seven was one of 3 receivers that was able to turn in 100-plus yard receiving performance. But my X factor in this one, I'm going to go with Seven McGee. He looks like he's just super comfortable as a wide receiver, albeit in pretty much just the spring game. We saw him move to wide receiver towards the tail end of last season when the Ducks had some depth issues. But I'm going to go with Seven McGee. I think that's the guy that they turn to when they need an explosive play, and I think that he'll show up and answer the call.
I really like that answer, Max. Seven McGee is one of those guys, even though we were talking about cross training for referring to defensive backs, I think Seven McGee is a player that you just really need on this Oregon football team. He is so athletic. He's so quick. Him being able to catch the ball and being moved over full time to wide receiver is really exciting to me. I would love to see him use, maybe this is a bit too much of a dream, but I'd love to see just getting the ball in his hands quickly from the pass, kind of like how NFL offenses use Debo Samuel or Cooper Kupp, just really just getting the ball to your quickest, fastest player. It's never a bad idea. It's never a bad idea. So I really like that X factor on offense, Max. For me, I did say a little earlier that I really want Oregon to pass to their tight end. So I'm gonna go a slash X factor. I'm gonna choose 2 guys, Terrence Ferguson and Maliki Matavo. the two top tight ends for Oregon. I think that they'll have some really big chances in this game. Maybe they won't put up the most yards, but I think on the goal line in the red zone, the Ducks should really be looking to these guys, and I could see both of them walking off with a touchdown if it's a good day for Oregon football.
And Maliki Monteval got his first college touchdown against Ohio State last year in the shoe, so we know that he can show up in big games. And Terrence Ferguson as well. He's a super athletic tight end. Lenny was talking earlier this week about how he was using both of those guys along with Terrell Tillman to kind of imitate Brock Bowers and give the defense a good look. So I guess the scout team is called like the look team. And that's a trend that's going to continue throughout the season. That was kind of another big takeaway from Lanning this week, is that he's going to be using some of the top guys, some of the starters, even if he has to prepare for the opponents. And we know how underutilized Oregon's tight ends were last season. So I'm all on board for that one, Graham. Let's switch over to defense now. How about you go first so I don't steal your guy?
Sure, sure. I'm gonna go with Jeffrey Bassa for my X factor on defense. He is a guy, we've been telling you about cross training, but Jeffrey Bassa was the precursor to that. I feel like, because even before Coach Martin and Coach Lanning came in with this idea of cross training, Jeffrey Bassa was already getting moved last season. He started at safety, and now coming into this season, he's a linebacker. He is the perfect model to me for a player that can do both, that box to box type of guy. He can drop into he's big enough, strong enough to drop into where the linebackers are playing, and quick enough to guard, tight ends, guard receivers. So I think if Oregon does get a full dose of those Georgia tight ends like we're expecting, he's going to be huge in limiting how effective they are.
That's a really good answer, and honestly, one that I wasn't expecting, Graham. So I've been a big Jeff Bassa fan since last season. Covered him a little bit coming out of high school, so knew he was a talented guy. But I think he's a really good solution as far as who you could try to get to cover, one of those tight ends, or if you want to go with Brock Bowers, because I think Brock Bowers is around 220. I could be wrong, but I think that's what he is. And Bassa is like 6'2", 212, I think. So I think you're always going to have that challenge of, if you go too big with a linebacker, they may not be able to match up with the speed. If you go smaller with the defensive back, they might get out muscled. Like, it's so hard to find that perfect combo there, but I think that Bassa would be a good one. It seems like Bennett Williams is going to be someone that they're going to turn to a lot as one of the most experienced safeties on the team. He's got big playability. We know he's physical. I remember in 2020, I was constantly asking myself, why isn't Bennett Williams playing more? And then he really cemented his role last year before he got hurt. Was picking off passes left and right with that secondary in the earlier half of the season. And they were really that bend don't break defense last year, which is not something that's going to get them where they need to go. And it's certainly not going to, maybe it won't, I'm not going to say that it'll prevent them from winning, but it's not the mentality you want to come out with against the defending national champions. So you're saying Jeff Bassa. I'm going to go with Noah Sewell and Justin Flo, that dynamic duo, primarily because when you talk this question about, make plays to swing momentum, the last time we saw Noah Sewell and Justin Flo on the field together, they were forcing fumbles like left and right. And those are also guys that are going to be tough to block if they get a full head of steam. I think that Noah Sewell, I don't know the numbers, but he was one of the most successful pass rushers and run stuffers for Oregon last year. So we know that he's someone that I feel Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoi have to feel comfortable turning to when they need a big play. And it seems like he's just taking another step this year. I like to call him the cyborg because he's just always just an animal, and he's just laying it all out there on the line and doing whatever the team asks of him. But Noah Sewell and Justin Flo, as maybe easy of an answer as it is, I think those are two guys that you're going to need to step up and make some big plays. And I think those could be some defensive X factors there, and someone that could make big plays to swing the momentum for the Ducks.
Yeah, you know what, Max? Just because it's an easy answer doesn't mean it's wrong. Noah Sewell and Justin Flo, should they be healthy for a whole season, could be the best linebacker duo in the nation. Especially you know, I know Sewell and I'm assuming Flo, we haven't seen as much of him, but both of them just so good at blitzing, at rushing the quarterback. So I'm really interested to see how Pac-12 quarterbacks and starting with Stetson Bennett and the Georgia quarterback deal with those two dudes coming full speed at them. I mean, I cannot think of a more scary sight, honestly.
Yeah, they're going to play a big role in Oregon's defensive game plan tomorrow, no doubt about it. But that's going to wrap it up for the mailbag section of the podcast. We already went 40 minutes, so I think we got a lot of really good stuff out of that. Thank you for submitting your questions. Always remember you can submit your question for the podcast by tweeting at me on Twitter at mtorresports and by using the Ducks Dish hashtag. So with that being said, let's hop into our next portion of the podcast, and that is our score predictions for the Oregon versus Georgia game, season opener for the Ducks. Quick side note, Gerard, I was actually literally just thinking about that. We just passed the 24-hour mark. 23 hours and 45 minutes from right now is kickoff. So yeah, the excitement just continues to build. But yeah, with all that being said, let's get into our score predictions. A reminder that you guys can find these stories. They're usually posted on Tuesday or Wednesday on Ducks Digest. Usually I said, Wednesday is usually the day that I go for. That's where you can find it. I'm going to put my prediction 35-24 Georgia is what I wrote. If you guys have been following the betting odds, sportsbooks haven't been super kind to Oregon in terms of giving them a lot of faith in this game or giving them much of a chance. 17 points, I believe, is the spread. And while I don't see Oregon winning this game, I see them at least being able to cover for sure. And I think that this is a game where you're going to see how far Oregon's roster has come, much like in the Ohio State game, where you can compete with a team that's this talented. But at the end of the day, I think Georgia still has more talent from top to bottom. It's on the road in Athens. You have a new offense, new defense, another new starting quarterback. We can't underrate how important the quarterback play is there. I'm not saying I'm not confident in Bo Nix, but there's just going to be some kinks that you have to work out. And I think that predicting the win is maybe a bit more than I'm willing to do right now. So I have Georgia 35-24, but I still think that if Oregon can keep it close like that, obviously that's 11 points. I think that you can still come away from this game with some positives, even if you don't get a win on the scoreboard at the end of the day.
Yeah, Max, before I give my prediction, I do want to say something about the spread. I do think it's a little bit ridiculous on I I don't know. Maybe ridiculous is a bit harsh, but 17 points is really is it seems a little disrespectful to me to Oregon. Um Last year for reference against Ohio State before the game, the spread was 15 points. And so no matter what, I think I can't imagine Oregon not covering that spread. But my prediction for the game is that Oregon will win 28-24. I think I see Bo Nix getting a couple of touchdown passes. Hopefully one to the tight ends. That like I was saying a little bit earlier. I think the running back core will get a couple of touchdowns as well. But really, I think that the Oregon defense will come to play. I think that Stetson Bennett maybe is a little bit overhyped in this moment in time. He had a fantastic end to the season for Georgia, and I would really be surprised if he keeps that level of play going, even though he was playing against some of the top defenses in the nation. Of course, he played against Alabama and played a great game, but I would be surprised if he plays that well again. I'm expecting at least a turnover or two from Stetson Bennett, and at the end of the day, I think that Oregon storms in again, just like they did last year to the shoe. They're going to storm into Mercedes-Benz and come out with that tight win. It'll be so close, Max. I really like what you said about how the margin of error is so small, and you could feel it the whole time watching the Ohio State game last year. That is like one mistake and Oregon is done. They're not gonna come back from that. And they were able to just tiptoe that line and stay in the driver's seat. And I see a pretty similar result tomorrow.
Yeah, and another thing, well, just to hit on your point about Stetson Bennett, it feels like he was pretty underrated until they got to the national championship, and then he was able to help them get that win over Alabama, which is certainly nothing to scoff at. That's no small task. So I feel like that's a reason, to think that he really is that guy. But I agree. I think that another key to the game for Oregon is going to be getting some pressure on Stetson Bennett, knocking him around early to show that you're able to contend with that offensive line and that you're not going to just let him sit in the pocket and get comfortable, do his thing. But that Georgia offense is one that feels disrespected. Like, I think that a lot of people are just or they were in the offseason just latching onto that defense as a big reason that they were able to win. And I think that Georgia offense took that and said, what, you think that we didn't play a role in that? You think that we're not going to come out and just, dominate? So that's a Georgia offense that I think feels really not disrespected, but they're fired up. Like, they're determined. I think their biggest thing this offseason was to be more explosive. They certainly have the guys to do that. As we've talked about a couple of the big names here. So Oregon's going to have to try to get some pressure on Stetson Bennett. That's something that they really didn't do against Ohio State. They were able to get 2 sacks, Braden Swinson, and then DJ Johnson's down the stretch, which was huge. But if you can't get pressure on Stetson Bennett, I think that you're going to be in for a long day, because that was one of the biggest areas that the Ducks really struggled with last year against Ohio State. So it'll be interesting to see if they can come out with the win. I think that one point that I'd be curious to get some of your thoughts on, and I talked about it on Monday's episode, I believe, and then I think I saw a comment on my YouTube channel, is just about how much stock can we put into that Ohio State game when we're talking about Oregon's chances against Georgia, because they're obviously 2 different teams, but I think the reason where a comparison is merited is because those are 2 of the top 5 programs in college football. But there was a comment on one of my videos. I'll just read it now because I got it pulled up. The fact that Oregon fans think that matching Ohio State's physicality means you can match Georgia's is laughable. Georgia is Utah, and then in parentheses, whose physicality you can't match with better players. Looking forward to Saturday. This was interesting because I think that that's what was so weird about those Utah games, right? Is because Oregon was able to match the physicality of Ohio State, and then you get to Utah, who you would think is probably less physical, definitely has a really good reputation of being a team that's tough to knock around, but I don't know if Utah is the best comparison for Georgia. Maybe in the Pac-12 it is as far as a physicality standpoint, but I just wanted to bring that discussion point, get some of your thoughts, and maybe see what people think here in the chat.
There's a lot to unpack there. First of all, I don't think Utah and Georgia are comparable on that level. Yes, Oregon got cooked by Utah twice last year. But was the physicality the biggest thing that Oregon lost on? I'm not sure. It felt like they got dominated in every way in those games. So I didn't know if the physicality was the biggest thing. But I think that the skill players that Ohio State had on their team last year shouldn't go unnoticed or unmentioned as well. You got Jackson Smith and Jigba, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson. That's 3 first-round wide receivers right there. All of them did have good days, but Oregon was able to contain them enough or keep, like you said a little earlier, Max, that bend don't break defense in order to end up winning the game. And I do believe that the games are pretty comparable just because Oregon is bringing back a lot of those players that were in the Ohio State game last year. The players that they are not bringing back are mostly, I think, some of those defensive backs like Verone McKinley, Mykael Wright. Oregon has gotten some good replacements, I think, at those positions, and they will also will not be going against such a talented wide receiver room. The tight ends are better for Georgia, yes, but I don't think the wide receiver room is better than last year's Ohio State, and I can't think of many that are better than that Ohio State wide receiver core last year. So no, it's not a direct comparison. Not by any means. They're very different teams, and Georgia is probably more talented than that Ohio State team. But I think that it's a good starting point for Oregon. It's a good way to see how that Oregon team with a lot of the same players this year reacted to that hostile environment far away from Autzen, and overcame that. So yeah, not completely comparable, but I think Ohio State to Georgia is a little bit closer than Georgia to Utah.
Yeah, so I think that the comparison doesn't totally match up, but at the same time, I think he makes a good point by saying, I think you're inferring that I'm surprised that Oregon's physicality fell off as much as it did down the line after they showed, so impressively against Ohio State. But we have a couple more thoughts here, maybe about 10 minutes or so before we wrap up here, Graham. I'm gonna see if I can share my screen and my audio to play a little soundbite from Lanning this week. Hopefully you can hear it. If not, it's okay. We'll just scrap it and we can still talk about the quote. But I'm sharing my screen, so let me know if you can hear this. It's a little 5-second clip when Dan Lanning was asked if there's any non-football activities planned in Atlanta. Oh. All right, I can't hear that one, so that's okay. I'm assuming you couldn't hear that either. But yeah, so Lanning was asked if there were any non-football activities outside or during their trip to Atlanta, and he just shook his head and then he said, "We're going there for work. We got a job." So if you didn't think Dan Lanning was locked in, you can go over my Twitter page and watch that clip. But he is he's absolutely locked in, as is the rest of this team. And that answer just fired me up and got me even more excited for this game on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm right with you, Max, and it actually brings in something that I didn't really think about, and that he's not going to be doing any recruiting in the Atlanta or Georgia Southern type of area, which I didn't think about, but I'm glad to hear that. I definitely am hoping that the coaching staff will make a trip back out there at some point in the year. But it's good to hear that Oregon is staying really, really focused, and I think that it's really easy to get off topic or to make it kind of about himself in Lanning, make it a revenge game, focus too much on this game altogether, because this is only the first game of the whole season, which I think that Lanning, throughout his practices, at least before the final practices, he was saying, we're not so focused on Georgia, just ourselves. Um, and so, but overall, it's very good to hear Lanning talk like that. And you know, it sends a message to everyone else on the team that that's the way it's going to be. That's the way we travel. That's the way that we act as a team.
Yeah, and I think that would just add in another layer of complexity to this game that you just don't really want to deal with. Because Lanning did say in his answer, like, we would normally do that, especially when you think about how Oregon needs to recruit nationally and how it's so much more difficult for them to get boots on the ground, get eyes on these prospects than a lot of these other schools like Georgia and the rest of the SEC and even some ACC schools. But I just thought that was an interesting thing, saying that they normally would, but this is the first time traveling, so I want to get everyone up to speed. Let's see. There were some other some other quotes that were interesting. Lanning was also asked about where he's maybe going to be looking for inspiration in his pregame speech, and he gave a pretty short and sweet answer. And he said, "The speech ain't going to win this game. We got to let our players play." So that was just another one that got me fired up. And he's just been a very strictly business type of coach. There's definitely those questions that get asked every now and then, Graham, where you can kind of tell, oh, maybe this reporter is kind of trying to get a little bit of a headline out of him. And, it's just another example of how we know that Dan Lanning's cut from the SEC cloth.
You said it perfectly right there, Max. He is cut from a different cloth. And I like the cloth that he's cut from. Ducks fans, I'm sure, do. He says all the right things. Um, his mentality, I feel like he does talk a lot about growth mentality in his practices among his players. And I think that he's really shown some different sides of him. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but just in the sense that he can focus on his team, get them where they need to be as a unit together, and then be able to shift gears on the week of, or maybe a little bit earlier of this big game, and be ready to focus all business. No I really love that quote that you gave too. You know, no pregame speech is going to win the game, and I think Ducks fans and hopefully Ducks players are ready to run through a wall for Dan Lanning before he's even coached a game.
Yeah, it's you just gotta listen to the pressers and you can get pretty excited. Not that Duck fans needed any more excitement for the season to get underway. Um, but another thing, another storyline that has been that a lot of people have made a lot of or been asking about throughout the offseason and certainly in this week leading up to the game, leading up to kickoff, is what advantages both teams have, seeing that there's so much carryover between the staff. Obviously, Lanning coming over from Georgia, Brian McClendon coming over from Oregon, and then reuniting in Athens with his alma mater. And they were basically just Lanning was saying that both he and Kirby Smart have a good feel for what the other is going to do defensively. And then he also continued, quote, sometimes coaches get too cute. It matters what my players know and what they can execute, going to come down to explosive plays, takeaways, who can out hit, who can out hustle, who can tackle on the perimeter. So it seemed like it was just, something that a lot of people are thinking about, but maybe making too much of, because he was kind of saying, we know that there's going to be those advantages, like maybe some instances here and there where they know what's maybe to be expected, but it reminds me almost of like a Stanford of old type of situation. Like, we're gonna run the ball. We know that we're gonna run the ball, but you haven't shown us that you can stop it. You haven't shown us that you can be more physical, that you can finish plays, that you can force turnovers. So I think that answer was just kind of inferring, say what you want about all of that, but if our guys can't execute, it doesn't mean squat.
Yeah, I know we don't talk about Mario Cristobal in the highest of light anymore, in the highest of regards these days anymore. But one thing that he said after the Washington game last year, in reference to Travis Dye going crazy with, I think he had more than 200 rushing yards in that game last season. Um, Cristobal said it's the ultimate sign of respect, is the ultimate win that your opponent knows what you're going to do and you still do it with success. So I really like that Lanning kind of is following that same type of vibe, you know, saying that coaches can't get too cute. I feel like I have definitely been thinking something like that will go on, all the crossover. It just feels like one huge chess match before the game has even started. Lanning knows Kirby Smart so well. He knows Todd Monken, who's calling the plays for the Georgia offense. Um, and I love that he said that we're not getting too cute, because in my head, I was thinking of all the ways, all the reverse psychology, all the thinking, oh, he thinks I'm going to do this. I like that Lanning's keeping it simple. We're going to do what we know is going to work.
Yeah, no doubt about it. One of the last quotes that I want to get to that I think is really cool to just kind of give us another feel of the mindset of Lanning and this team heading into this game against the Georgia Bulldogs is, because he said it multiple times throughout his pressers, is play the game, not the occasion, which is so cool because it's just, he in this age of sports media, with digital media, I think it's so easy for all this stuff to surface on social media, and players or coaches just make too much of the little things. This answer was also in part due to Braden Swinson saying that he maybe felt like he was a little overlooked by Georgia. And Lanny was asked, hey, are you going to be kind of reminding him like, Georgia overlooked you more or less? But he's like, no, we're not really going to be doing that. Just keep them focused on the task at hand. That's my job. That's our job as coaches. And we expect the same thing of our players. So no need to overcomplicate it. Don't feed into the hype, and just go out and show what you've been working on the whole offseason and what you want the rest of the country to know and think about Oregon football.
Yeah, Lanning. I really again like that quote. He says all the right things, doesn't he? Um, I'm ready for Oregon to show the nation again that they're not messing around. And I think that, uh, you can even tell by the way this Oregon game is scheduled. It's in the middle of the day. It's at noon for us here on the or 12:30, excuse me, for us here on the West Coast. It's not the primetime game, and it's the national champions in the that they're playing. So I think that says enough for what the media thinks of Oregon, and I think they are ready to prove that they're in that elite conversation.
Last point I want to get to, I like this comment here from Sco Ducky saying this game is a measuring stick on how this season will go. Yeah, I don't know if I would agree for the whole season, like how the whole season's going to go, because a majority of Oregon's opponents are not on this level. But it's a really good measuring stick to just see where Oregon's at. Like I'd be really curious to see how this game plays out and then compare it to, how did we feel about this team after the Ohio State game versus how do we feel about this team after the Georgia game, even though there's obviously new players, new coaches, and so many things to factor into. But this kind of reminds me of what Lanny was saying when he was asked, like, did you wish that there was maybe a game where you could kind of tune things up before you hop into a game like this? And he's like, no, there's no powder up game here. You get to play real competition really quickly, and we're pumped about it. So I don't know if I would say for the entire season how the whole season's going to go, but it's definitely going to give us a really good sense of where this Oregon team is at. And regardless of what happens, you can say we went out there and played against the national champions, and we know where we stack up and where we have to grow to kind of get to their level.
It's really tough to say because yes, I agree. Georgia is on a different level from the rest of Oregon's opponents, and it feels like we've been looking at this game so much for a very good reason, of course. But we've been looking at this game so much that we're not thinking about Eastern Washington coming to town next weekend. We're not thinking about the BYU game. I'm not thinking about going to Cal Berkeley. I don't even want to start saying that. Any of the NorCal Pac-12 schools, I'll probably get nervous again. Just bad memories from last season and seasons before. But I think it will be definitely interesting to see how Oregon does. And I think that you can use it a little bit as a measuring stick, but Oregon beat Ohio State last year and then lost to Stanford. So, it's all about playing your game, not necessarily playing to your other team's level.
Yeah, so we got to see if Oregon can play up to Georgia's level. I think that they're up for the task. Really fun episode today, Graham. We're going to go ahead and wind down. Shout out to Mikey G for this nice comment. Mikey G says, gotta say thanks to Max for all the great content and keeping us informed during this crazy off season. Always in my feed with breaking/relevant news. Appreciate it, Max. Appreciate you, Mikey, for all the continued support of my work on Ducks Digest and then here on the Ducks Dish podcast. If you guys want a bigger view of week 1 of college football, I just recorded an episode of the Pac-12 Takeover podcast, my Pac-12 podcast, where I give my previews and picks of the entire week 1 slate in the Pac-12. So go ahead and check that out. But Graham, where can people find more of you?
Before I get into that, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our guys watching live with us right now who've been with us throughout this crazy offseason. Guys, we finally made it. We're right there on the doorstep of some more Oregon football. So we made it, and thanks for the crazy offseason journey. But you can find all my stuff right here. Oh, tried to get, yeah, there we go. Right there, my handle, Graham Metzker. Always seem to get the point wrong. I'm doing a lot of stuff for Ducks Digest. It's football season, so we're back. I'm doing a bunch of stuff for KWVA 88.1 FM, UO's campus radio. I'm hosting, I'm producing games over there, so go check me out on KWVA. And just stay tuned for a great Oregon football season.
Absolutely. Well, if you guys want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter at mtorresports right there. If you guys are watching on YouTube, youtube.com/Oregon Football Max Torres, smash the like button, smash the subscribe button. It's a tremendous help to what we're doing, trying to grow our coverage, and then share the Ducks Dish podcast. That is a big help as we try to grow the community. You saw how everybody was showing out in the comments, a lot of great discussion, and we do this show pretty often. I'm trying to ramp it up, so I'm super excited. Want to say thanks to Graham for giving me some of his time to hop on this episode of the podcast. Thank you to you guys for your questions, and thank you to you guys for your support and watching and listening to the Ducks Dish podcast. That'll do it. Make sure you guys tune in tomorrow. We'll probably have an episode breaking down the game, maybe a live show after the Georgia-Oregon game. So stay tuned for that. But until next time, thank you so much for listening to the Ducks Dish podcast.